Is that a 48% wound poison on 2 targets? Wait, Outlaw has Shadow Dance? What is happening to rogues in Dragonflight? Okay, well, maybe there is an explanation, but we'll get to that later. In the meantime, we got to play around with rogues on Alpha, while theory crafting with some pros, so stay tuned as we give you a preview of what's ahead for rogues in Dragonflight PvP. But before we start, we're going to be pumping out content for Dragonflight, Wrath Classic, and of course Shadowlands in the upcoming months, so be sure to subscribe to stay ahead of the meta. Let's start off with some general changes that every rogue can look forward to, regardless of spec. First, one of the biggest changes, Wound Poison will have a baseline 29% healing reduction for all rogue specs. This is thanks to improved Wound Poison and Master Poisoner, which are easily accessible in the class talent tree, and give 29% healing reduction to both Sub and Outlaw, who were previously capped at 12%. On top of that, Echoing Reprimand, Thistle Tea, and Shadow Dance will all be accessible for any spec as end-cap talents. Thistle Tea is obviously new here, and might be a huge part of a single-target build we will be discussing later. Shadow Dance as an option for Outlaw and Assassination is quite interesting. Chances are it will be an easy pickup for Outlaw Rogue, since its cooldown gets reset with Restless Blades, but again, more on that later. But enough of general changes, let's get into the nitty-gritty, starting with Sub. So, here's the problem. The talent tree is basically split in half. In the middle, you have a bunch of stuff you will want, including a new end-cap talent called Shadow Mist, which grants both an anima-charged combo point and a charge of Shadow Step whenever you stealth, vanish, or Shadow Dance. This seems pretty big, especially since sub-rogues can have 2 charges of vanish thanks to a talent on the left side of the tree. This is all fine, but the main problem lies deep within the right side of the tree, where you get the majority of your eviscerate modifiers. This is where you'll find shadowed finishers, deeper stratagem, and finality, which you need for maximum eviscerate damage. Unfortunately, all of this is gated behind some stuff you could care less about, like Shuriken's Storm Talons, which is the opposite problem on the left side of the tree, where most things are incredibly useful for single target sustained damage with key talents you will also be wanting. So what does this mean? It means that there might be 2 completely different playstyles to Sub-Rogue, resulting from a clear division between both sides of your talent tree. The right side is more consistent with the modern Sub-Rogue playstyle, where damage modifiers are stacked with Eviscerate. This side would encourage the hit-and-run, bursty Sub-Rogue meta that we have seen for the past few expansions. The other side of the talent tree funnels more damage into combo point builders, which would encourage a more classic Rogue playstyle of sparring with the enemy team. But no matter what, Sub in general will have more control overall thanks to the addition of Garrow, while having significantly more mobility due to Shadow Step resets, likely solidifying itself as king of control. And speaking of which, Outlaw is where things get really interesting. Outlaw is already a tanky master of control, and will have even more control with Shadow Dance, while still holding onto a lot of existing tech like Blinding Powder. As far as damage is concerned, the Outlaw tree has multiple modifiers connected to Ambush, due mostly in thanks to a talent called Hidden Opportunity deep into the tree. This will make Opportunity, which normally duplicates Sinister Strike damage, also duplicate Ambush damage, which is a big deal considering Ambushes grant more combo points than Sinister Strike, resulting in more cooldown reduction, and even grant an anima charged combo thanks to Heavy Hitter. And since Outlaw will have a resettable Shadow Dance, they will actually be able to benefit from Ambush related talents. There is also a relatively niche build focused around AoE with the new Blade Flurry talents, giving it increased damage when it strikes fewer targets. This might become an actual strategy against melee cleaves, since Blade Flurry itself already has an increased PvP modifier, and the fact that it can spread wound poison across multiple targets. So yeah, more AoE pressure. This might have been a lot to follow, but the TLDR is that Outlaw Rogues will have even more control, a better Mortal Strike effect, and more single target damage thanks to Ambush talents. Alright, so what about Assassination? Unfortunately, Assa will suffer from a very similar problem to Sub with talent point selection, which results in the exact same consequence, that it might have one build focused on single target damage, utilizing talents like Cold Blood and a newly added Poison that modifies Envenom damage. On the flip side, there is an entirely different build focusing on ramping up DPS with bleeds with a new talent called Deathmark, which seems to have replaced Vendetta. In some ways, these 2 builds replace the current division in Assa Rogue gameplay, which is primarily divided between sustained damage and gimmicky all-in one-shots. The outlook of the bleed-focused damage build might be a bit grim in Season 1 of Dragonflight, as evokers have access to a bleed dispel on a 1-minute cooldown, effectively countering its entire damage toolkit. Assa will also have access to Shadow Dance, of course, but might actually bypass it in favor of Thistle Tea, which has 3 charges and grants 100 energy on use. In most games, this will allow it to line up perfectly perfectly with Kidney Shot, giving you the ability to dump more damage during your stuns and avoiding the annoying problem of being energy starved, which affects Asa the hardest of all 3 rogue specs. And as a final note, Asa will be able to use 4 poisons at the same time thanks to a talent deep within its tree. This will allow stacking both wound and deadly as lethal poisons, and crippling and numbing in the non-lethal slot. Not the most groundbreaking change, but having numbing baseline might allow Asa to have slightly more utility. So, what is the state of Rogue and Dragonflight? While it might be too early to truly tell, all 3 rogue specs are maintaining their existing identity. Sub will still have lots of control, but will now be more slippery with a second Vanish charge, while potentially having the ability to run a build focused on sustained damage. Outlaw will gain even more control options thanks to having access to Shadowdance and Garrett Silence, with an exciting new damage profile built around Ambush. And as for Asa, it's more or less the same spec, but might run into huge problems in Season 1, where Evokers might be running rampant with a 1-minute bleed dispel. But for all rogue specs, having both Gouge and a 29% healing reduction as baseline options seems pretty good on paper, so there's a lot to look forward to. But we want to know what you think. Are you excited for what you've seen with Rogue on Alpha? Let us know what you would change in the comments below. And once again, please consider subscribing. We will be uploading tons of new content for Dragonflight, Wrath Classic, and Shadowlands in the next few months, and we want to make sure you stay ahead of the meta. As always though, we want to thank you all for watching. See you soon.